Hi, good evening. I got to tell you, I got to be honest with the audience. I have been so forward to this conversation with Sarah, if it's okay to call you Sarah, from Texas. And, so from Florida to Texas, hey, everyone. I'm Karen. I'm a school board member here in Tampa, Florida, and I cover a countywide um, district. And I was elected in 2018, and I am an LCSW. I'm a certified traumatologist and a certified forensics counselor. So I am so excited for this conversation with Sarah from Texas. So I'm going to let Sarah take it away and introduce herself.
Good evening, everyone. As Karen said, my name is Sara Mann. I am from Texas. Coming to you from San Antonio, Texas right now. I am an educator at heart. I spent a lot of years in the classroom. I'm certified as a teacher in Texas, but also certified and have worked as a school counselor, a campus level assistant principal, and held multiple positions at central office. And then I've also worked in the higher ed realm. So lots of experience on the education and the mental health side.
Yes. So I'm just excited to have this conversation. So Sarah, when I first got elected, I ran on the mental health, platform. But I noticed that when I was running, a lot of people were like, mental health, we don't need no mental health, you know, to be honest with you, everybody was like, mental health is not it. And much to my dismay and surprise, mental health has really taken the number one spot in a lot of conversations um, nationally. Not just when it comes to um, our the adults, like we have athletes, we have a lot of our the children follow in the media, a lot of singers, a lot of actors, and they have also verbalized the need for themselves to take a step back. What are you seeing as far as the mental health is concerned right now?
Well, I would say that in Texas, it certainly is taking a more forward position, not anywhere in where it should be, in my opinion. But we are beginning to see some movement towards that. I work primarily in the schools. So while we see some increased mental health conversation and work in the at the community level, we're also beginning to see some traction in moving that forward. The Texas legislature has made some changes in the last session, bringing mental health forward and creating some changes in schools, and that's always a good thing.
Now, in 2018, when I ran, February 14th of 2018, we had Marjorie Stoneman that happened here. Unfortunately, students lost their lives in a school shooting here, and so it moved the students that did survive that shooting and their parents to you know forms and move for legislation for gun safety, for hardening of the schools, for mental health funding coming down into our schools. And that, I got to tell you, Sarah, that has been for us an enormous godsend because that funding into our schools has allowed us, still not yet, because we're still trying to get enough social workers, psychologists, and counselors and school counselors. Because, of course, according to the statistics, we're supposed to have one of each per 250 students. Is that the same over there?
I wish. No,
Oh.
we haven't quite seen the same movement as you guys have. Our required numbers in schools are actually higher than that, and we aren't required to have multiple levels of professionals. Our requirements are only for school counselors. There's no legislative requirements related to other mental health professionals in our schools, and so that becomes a district level decision. And as you know, because we had spoken previously, I was the district that I was in 2016, just prior to 2 years prior to y'all's shooting, was the district where the Sutherland Springs community is within. And so I was part of the district's recovery and response plan for the Sutherland Springs shooting. That led me to work for the University of Texas at San Antonio and continue some of the work with districts in our area in building response plans. While I was there, we had the shooting at a Walmart in El Paso. I was actually in El Paso that weekend doing some work with those first responders the month after, exactly a month after, not the weekend of the shooting, but a month after when we had a shooting in Midland and Odessa, and traveled from El Paso to Midland that weekend to help them be prepared. That was Labor Day weekend. So I spent Sunday and Monday with those school districts to help them be prepared to respond. But despite that, we haven't seen as much legislative action or advocacy, I think, as you guys have seen in Florida. We are hoping that as we move into Texas legislature goes back into session in January. And so we are hoping and having lots of conversations now with lots of people hoping to get some movement. We are not anticipating there is a big push right now for Governor Abbott to call a special session specifically related to gun control, but it doesn't look like that's likely to happen.
Because with the mental health, I just noticed, when I was elected, my major concern and what really alarmed me was that the CDC was showing that children between the age of 5 and 12 were committing suicide. And for me to have a child, when I was 5, I didn't know anything about suicide, or let alone know anyone who committed suicide. But for a child to not know what or have an outlook for life past 5 years old and feel that suicide is an option for them is horrible. And at 5, our kids are in either pre-K, right, or kindergarten. Mm-hmm. So being able to have the supports in place starting in pre-K, and I know the conversation a lot is, we don't need mental health providers in pre-K. I feel we do. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think we do have, I would say that it's pretty consistent in Texas that we do have licensed school counselors at all of our schools. That is including our pre-K, our campuses that have pre-K and kinder on them. Again, those we don't often see. We may see LCSWs or LSWs, but we don't typically have other mental health professionals. There are some districts that also employ some LPCs, but not at the same ratio as our school counselors. But absolutely, I think that the mental health perspective has to start early, and it has to be consistent throughout.
What I have found is having the supports, having the school counselors have the support of the LCSW and the psychologists, that marriage of the 3 professionals in the schools has been amazing, because you have the social workers who work with the needs of the students and the families, whether it comes from housing or the lack thereof, or homelessness, or, the need of, to be able to get to food, or, get the electricity turned back on so that child could be able to get back home into security of having that the lights turned on at home, or be able to help them apply for Medicaid, for the student, for insurance, for the health care. And then the school counselor, as that support, and then the psychologist to be able to conduct those assessments and evaluations for those children. That marrying of those three has been amazing here in Hillsborough County. Not enough, because our district is the seventh largest in the nation, of course, but so we keep having to seek that support from those three professional categories. But it's been incredible. I can't imagine having a district with just the support only of counselors and not the other two supportive professionals, there along with them.
Yeah, and I do think most districts in Texas employ social workers and LPCs, or school psychologists, licensed specialists in school psychology, LSSPs, but certainly not at the same ratio as our school counselors. So it is a constant effort on the part of the district or the school, the campus, to seek those opportunities for collaboration between mental health professionals to make sure that they're really meeting all of those needs, just like you just talked about. There's well-rounded needs. One of the exciting things is I do think that we're beginning to see, with the changes that the Texas legislature made, Texas has it's now written into law, the Texas Model Guide for Comprehensive Guidance Programs. So we're seeing movement in the types of services that school counselors are able to provide, and the way programs are running. And we are seeing a really consistent movement in Texas focused on social emotional learning as a more comprehensive school-wide approach to meeting students' needs. And so I think that's always positive when we're beginning to see those advances move forward across our districts.
Here in Hillsborough County, our teachers are trauma trained. Bus drivers, our nutrition personnel, even the custodians are all trauma trained. To be able to, if a child is having an issue, or they spot a child that's having an issue, to be able to provide that support, and then bring them to the appropriate professional that needs there at the school. But one of the things that we have done here in Hillsborough County Schools is provide that training all the way around. Mm-hmm. And we also conduct trauma assessments, and also the behavioral assessments as well, because previously, the Baker Acts were higher. I don't know how you do the Baker Acts there, but now what they're doing is now they're conducting an assessment to make sure the child is just not having a meltdown or just having a bad day, and then conducting themselves appropriately from there. But what do you do? Do you have like a threat assessment, or are the teachers trauma educated?
There's no mandates for trauma education across the state, so that is left up to the district. So I think that's inconsistent across the district. I think some districts have taken that approach and become taken the steps to make sure that across the board, people that work with children are trauma informed and understand the principles of that. But again, that's not consistent statewide, but we are seeing that in a lot of districts that they're taking that approach. But we do have threat assessment teams. That is a requirement here. And those have a variety of people, including multiple mental health professionals across the district. School nurses also sit in often on those threat assessment teams, as well as other district personnel. So we do have a system probably similar to what you guys use in Florida related to that.
Okay. So, when it comes to our district, we have 90% of our students are living below poverty level. What does that look like in your district over there?
So I'm actually right now I'm with Alamo Colleges District, which is the overarching umbrella for 5 of the community colleges here in San Antonio. So I'm working in the higher ed realm. But our I would say in this, so San Antonio, the San Antonio area has a bunch of different school districts, and they vary greatly in their economically disadvantaged percentages. Some districts are 90% and higher. And then we have districts also in the San Antonio area that might be more 50 or 60 split, and then some that are less than that, obviously. But we have a really diverse group of districts. Some of our larger districts that span a large portion of the city, while they may have a more moderate overall district percentage, they certainly have campuses that are at both extremes of that, where 90+% of their students are economically disadvantaged, living at or near the poverty level, and then campuses that have maybe 5, 10, 15% students that are like that. So we see a lot of variation, and I think that's pretty consistent across the state for us in Texas. Certainly in our metropolitan areas, because our metropolitan areas are all made of multiple school districts. We see a lot of variety in that. But we have a lot of rural areas in Texas. Obviously, we're huge, and lots of rural areas. And the area around San Antonio that we work closely with, Texas is divided into 20 regions for educational purposes. And the region around San Antonio is considered Region 20. But it's very vast, stretches, a couple hundred miles across, and a couple hundred miles north and south, probably, maybe not 200, but at least 100 miles north and south. And so it's a really vast region. And so we get a lot of discrepancies in the kind of students that we work with.
Do you have a lot of homelessness where you are?
In the metropolitan area, we see that again. It's I would say it's concentrated in more districts, in some districts more than others. There's some districts where they probably don't deal with a lot of homelessness, but certainly our more inner city districts, where a lot of our shelters are, or a lot of services for homeless we see greater homeless populations there. And we have some districts in the metropolitan area where they even service a lot of students that are living in shelters themselves. Years ago, when I taught for San Antonio ISD, I had multiple students in my classroom that were living in a shelter at the time. So that's not uncommon for us to see in some of our very urban inner city districts.
Really? Here we had, prior to the pandemic, we had students that were homeless. We have a homeless social worker that works with them and everything. But after and during the pandemic, and then after now because we're not after the pandemic, we're still, still in the ripple of it. But I'm seeing a lot more children because of the economic issue. Prices are higher, rent is going up. Families can't afford, the housing the way they are. A lot of families are moving in together, and families don't realize that when you don't have your own place, and you're moving in with grandma, uncle, a friend, or that you're considered homeless. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing that more over there, like we are here?
Very much so. We have a lot of multi-generational homes, a lot, or families that are doubled up together in the same homes. And probably just like you, while it was prevalent before, it certainly is more so after the pandemic. We're seeing that, and we're seeing the effects of that in our schools and in our classrooms. In my current role, I work specifically with 3 high schools, And those 3 high schools are within one of the urban districts, one of the inner city districts. And just lots of behavioral challenges that they, that they weren't used to seeing. They're all early college high schools where students have an opportunity to earn an associate's while they're in high school. And we dealt with lots of those challenges last year that we hadn't experienced to that level or that frequency in years, really. And a lot of that we attribute to, the challenges of students being remote for a long time. Our students stayed in a remote setting for almost a year. And for many of them, more than a year for some of them. And the socialization aspects, the isolation, we certainly, just like everybody across the nation, we saw lots of increased mental health challenges coming out of that, which of course often manifest themselves in behavioral challenges.
Do you provide, like in 2018, what I did was a mental health tour in order to provide the parents with resources. Hey, we're here, our community partners, they're here, to provide those supports for you and your families. But is that something that you have? Is that partnership with the community to be able to direct the families to be able to get those supports in mental health?
Yeah, I would say that most districts have a really good resource list. Families have lots of needs. So their counselors and their school counselors and their social workers. And a lot of our districts have what they call family and community engagement specialists, FACE specialists that work directly to engage families. And so a lot of those districts have built pretty extensive resource lists that they can utilize to direct families. In my work when I was at UTSA, my primary work when I was in that position was to work with smaller rural districts. We have this urban area, but we're surrounded by a lot of really rural districts that may have, one of those districts only has one counselor, K-12. They have about 300 kids K-12 and one counselor K-12. To districts that might have one per campus, they have 3, 4, 5 campuses, and they have one per campus. Some that have multiple per campus. And so one of my responsibilities when I was working for UTSA, it came following the Sutherland Springs shooting, when there are times, and it doesn't have to be a mass casualty incident, but there are times where even when you might have 2 students that die in a car accident, or a teacher that dies of cancer, or a student that dies of cancer. I mean, we know that that grief and trauma happen all the time. It's part of our lives, right? And so there are times where districts need more support than others, right? And so it came from our work following the Sutherland Springs shooting. And we started with 7 districts across 2 counties. And we brought all of the mental health professionals from those 7 districts together to provide some common training and establish some common protocols so that when something happened in one of their districts, they had a pool. Now we had about 40 counselors across the 7 districts that we could bring together that had the same training, knew what had similar protocols, had established these protocols that they would all utilize and follow. And one of the pieces of that, the reason I bring that up now, is because we started pulling resource lists. So where one district may have had 8 or 10 different resources, we start pulling those together across the 2 counties. And that work started with that original group of districts that came together to support Floresville ISD following that shooting. But it ended up spanning all over Region 20, all over the Region 20 area. And we built clusters of school districts all around our rural areas so that they would each have a team to support them. We utilized that same process following the shooting in Uvalde. I was asked to come in and assist with that. And so some of the individuals that I worked with in from Northside ISD, which is our third largest district in the state, obviously the largest district in the San Antonio area, some of our mental health professional colleagues there, as well as some of them that I had worked with previously in UTSA, were asked to come consult and assist Uvalde in their response. And so we were able to we brought in about 60 school-based mental health professionals those first few days afterwards that had almost all of them had been part of that initial training at UTSA when I worked at UTSA, where we were building those. So they had a common understanding of what it was going to look like when they all showed up. Everybody knew what their role was and what they were expected to do, because they may have been trained in a different cluster. Many of them didn't know each other because these 6 or 8 districts were trained together and these 5 or 7 districts were trained together. But the processes were the same. And so they were familiar, they had their resources and they had their materials, and they were able to really show up at a moment's notice. They were called Tuesday night and showed up Wednesday morning. And but part of that is also knowing what those resources are in your area.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you so much, because I know one of the things, as a mental health provider, as a trauma specialist, a lot of parents, now that school is going to start, they call me and they said, I'm having some anxiety. I'm having some real angst about my child going to school and some of the stuff that's happened, with the school shootings, with, sending my child to school and me going to work and feeling okay with having my child at school. So what I say to them is, we have the shooter drills at school, and the children are always prepared for that. But also, we have the hardening of the schools. We know, as counselors, to be able to have those conversations with the parents, but the parents also, grade level and age level appropriate conversation with their children. But so how do you have a conversation with parents over there? Because I know here in Florida, it was real, here, with Marjorie Stillman. And how do you have conversations with parents? Now school is going to start in another week. And, the parents are, probably a little bit anxious, getting their students back off to school.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And certainly there's direct trauma and then there's vicarious trauma, right? And so those conversations look very differently in communities that have experienced shootings. Their experience is different and their needs are different. Yes. But it doesn't mean that we don't see that all across the state, right? Mm-hmm. I am positive that in districts all across the state, school administrators and school counselors are having those conversations with parents. And I think the most important thing for us to do when we're having those conversations is acknowledge the fact that their fear and their anxiety is real for them. It is real for them. And how we reassure them or make them feel comfortable there's not one answer. I think you have to treat each one of those conversations with parents or with children. You really have to take it from an individual perspective. Their fears and anxieties are driven sometimes for different reasons. And we have to acknowledge that and really understand what their needs are, I think is the best way to start with that. And just work with each case to try to find a way to resolve whatever it might be that's causing that anxiety for them.
And you mentioned something really important also. You mentioned about the behavior. After COVID, you've noticed, behavior has changed. So, if as parents, they notice behavior changing in their children also, that they're not able to sleep, they've lost appetite, they've lost interest in being with their friends, or maybe even lost interest in their studies, to really take that as a red flag to seek some help for their student. What do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that would be the perfect opportunity for us to share with families is that, these are things that are often signs for us that kids may be feeling certain ways, and they may be choosing to not articulate that, or they may not even realize that they're having those feelings and are able to articulate it, right? So it's really our responsibility to acknowledge that those behaviors look different, and then work with the school. Have a conversation with your school counselor, have a conversation with your school administrator or your school social worker, whoever, whatever mental health professional you have available to you at your campus. To really work through that, and begin the conversations with the students, right? And then figure out what age, what is age appropriate in our response, and then what type of appropriate services are appropriate for them. Can we do a group in school? Can we have a little group session in school? Is it an outside referral that's needed for that student? But again, it really goes back to what I said before. Those behaviors are driven by something. We have to acknowledge that. And that whatever's driving those behaviors is real for that individual. And the way to resolve those may look different. And so it's important that we have a whole bunch of tools in our toolbox, as educators and as mental health professionals that work in the schools specifically. I think about, I would say that what we would like for it to be, what did you say your ratio was? 250 to 1? Yeah.
Yes.
I think that a lot of our districts are significantly higher than that, 300, 400, maybe even more sometimes. And so when you have 300 or 400 kids that you're working with directly, it's going to require a lot of different types of approaches and resources. And we just have to continue to support our mental health professionals that work in our schools to make sure that they're equipped for that. And we have to work together because one person can't do all of that, right? So that's one of the things that when we built those clusters, that's one of the things that we really worked on. I don't know how much on the academic side you guys focus on professional learning communities and building those collaborative practices around educators. We know that research tells us that is highly effective in improving instruction when we have educators work together, right? But one of our goals is to try to build those collaborative practices among our mental health teams as well. We talked about this a lot when I was training those groups, that teachers don't get that opportunity very often to go watch other teachers teach, but they get it a whole lot more often than mental health professionals.
Yes.
And so one of the unintended benefits, it wasn't something that we had really planned for, but our very first group that we built, that first group of mental health professionals that we built as a collaborative team across those 7 districts, they had 6 student deaths in 6 months. Some accidental, some illnesses, a couple of suicides. We had not anticipated. I mean, that training came following the Sutherland Springs shooting, so we could be prepared for the next incident. But we didn't realize that what we were really preparing for was 6 smaller scale, but still very needy incidents, right? So that particular group had an opportunity to implement their work a lot, very quickly, in a short amount of time. And in our reflections and work with them, that was one of the things that we heard over and over from them, was that when they got to come together and provide that group response, and we had we would set up a room for students to come in, and counselors would be spread out across that room, and they'd all have their table with their set of resources, and they could hear other counselors and they could watch other counselors work with students. They talked frequently about how exponentially quick their own capacity grew. And so that is something that we took in as we moved that practice forward across other districts, was trying to create those opportunities. And when we work specifically with individual districts about building out their comprehensive plan, is just like you find it in, just like we put priority for our teachers to be able to work together and plan together and watch each other and learn from each other and grow from each other. We really have to create those type of opportunities for our mental health professionals too.
That is so, and I'm gonna steal it from you if you don't mind. But that's so true. When I am supervising an intern and they're watching me, they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that,
Mm-hmm.
or being able to collaborate with another therapist and working, when we team together and work with a patient, that it's the same idea. You learn from each other.
And we don't get a lot of those opportunities, and so we have to be intentional about doing that. We are I don't know about you guys, but I would say in Texas, we're becoming more intentional about doing that with our educators and creating those opportunities, and especially our new teachers. Man, we are quick to create time for them to go observe other teachers, for them to work with mentor teachers. But that is not a common practice for our mental health professionals. You get your master's degree, you get your license, you get a counseling job, knock yourself out, get after it, right? Like, figure it out. You're on your own. And so even when I became a school counselor for the first time, I had been an educator for a long time, 12 or 14 years. And I got my first counseling job. I had been teaching at a middle school, and I got a counseling job also at middle school, but in a different school district. And, all the things that I thought I would do over the course of my career as a school counselor came at me like the first semester. I had an outcry for a sexual abuse. I had a couple of students that made outcries related to suicide. I got caught up in a nasty custody dispute. Like all the things that you anticipate might happen to you when you're preparing to be a school counselor, they all came flying at me really fast. And I was fortunate enough that there were 2 counselors at that campus. And so I had an experienced counselor that I could talk to and bounce ideas off of. And there were times where the child that I was working with, I would say, is it okay with you if I bring Mrs. So-and-so in also? And I would run next door and grab her and get her up to speed and say, can you help me walk through this one? But there weren't very many times where she was working with a student that I just got to observe. There were times where she supported me, but that looks different and feels different than if I could have just sat and watched her. If I had the opportunity, just like we create for teachers, if I had the opportunity to just watch her work with students and then reflect on that with her and learn and grow. And so, I hope that we can move that direction when we talk about school-based mental health professionals, and we take that same approach that we do with our educators, because I think it's powerful.
That's awesome. I love our conversation. I just want to say to the audience real quick, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and they'll be, put up so that we can answer them. But I'm really enjoying this conversation. One of the things also I wanted to ask, what does your school to prison pipeline look like over there?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't know the actual statistics. Mm-hmm. There has been some legislative changes recently to try to negate that, because, I don't know the actual numbers. I wasn't prepared for that, Karen. I didn't know you were going to ask. So I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I would say that there's a dramatic push to change it.
Okay.
We have seen changes in truancy guidelines to address that. We've seen changes in practice related to just disciplinary assignments in school and out of school suspensions. But there has been quite a movement to decriminalize a lot of things that were considered criminal acts previously, to address that.
Okay. I know here in Tampa, we have a lot of issues with the school to prison pipeline, and they continue. This year alone, during the pandemic, there was over 60%, 68% of our Black and Latino children were suspended, out of school suspension. When, we're trying to keep them in school, we're trying to keep them, in, with the education going, we're trying to keep them focused in their learning tracks. And it's very difficult to do that. But as you know, when they're out of school, when they see that they're being targeted, that mental health piece really comes into place. I've I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunately had the opportunity to speak to a lot of children that have been in the school to prison pipeline. I volunteered for juvenile justice 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for a whole year. And what I notice is that their depression level is so high that I think they stayed in that space, in that depression, because in their minds, they would tell me, well, it doesn't matter anyways, nobody cares about me, and I think that really worked because their demeanor, their affect, the way they talked, it just completing an assessment just by looking at them, you could see that these youth were in depression, and that was ongoing. It was over, 6 months. So it was major depressive disorder. And then let's not get another diagnosis on top of that, because, it's just, mental health, it just, and that's in our Black and Latino community.
It's real absence of hope, right? Like just a real absence of hope. And we know that hope has to be there for resilience to be present, right? And so that's those two, there's such a correlation between that. So I do think that that's an important thing for us to think about.
Yeah, definitely. So, that's one of the things that I'm working on, as a board member, is ensuring that, those children, especially those populations, don't feel like they're targeted. They feel supported, that they feel that support here in our schools, and that, what they do, as opposed to another culture, that doesn't, their counterparts, when they get suspended and the counterpart doesn't, that playing field is leveled off, and that our children are kept in school, that their education is the first thing, that is addressed, and not their suspension piece. Because for me, their mental wellness and the out of school suspensions, I believe, go hand in hand.
I think that that's probably a fair assessment. I think that we know that I think that we know that just the general feeling of value and personal self-worth, right, is often implicated by our disciplinary assignments, and certainly that can impact their level of depressive symptoms.
Yeah, I know that suicide rates among the Black females and Black males are going up, and that was unheard of in the past. And today, those rates are going up. Unfortunately, they're not decreasing. So that lets me know that issue with mental health, self-esteem, are there and apparent, in these two communities,
Well, and we have some work to do on the, we also know that those communities are often less likely to seek medical care, certainly less likely to seek mental health care, right? And so we have a lot of work to do in those communities to make sure that they feel trusted and valued, and that those resources, that the resources that are available to them are trusted and valued resources,
Right.
and that that they feel comfortable utilizing those.
Yeah.
And that's a big push that we're going to have to move forward in those communities. I
Yeah.
don't know what our numbers are, but I would imagine that ours probably parallel yours.
Yeah, and not just that, they don't have access to healthcare. So, a lot of times, there's families that have access to healthcare, but their healthcare does not allow them access to mental health. I didn't realize until some of the folks started coming to me. I have a private practice, and they come to me and they're like, my insurance doesn't cover mental health, and I'm like, so imagine the families of low income that do not have access to insurance.
Right.
And, so for them, that mental health is probably seemingly so out of reach for them that, you know, um, drug and alcohol abuse is that self medicating, that they feel like, okay, I'm not going to get mental health medication, so I'll just, do the alcohol and the drug. And that leads them down to a even worse path. So, I'm hoping that we could capture our kids here in, the K through 12 system, or, pre-K through 12 system, and, provide those resources that they truly, truly need in order to make them, give them those supports that they need for the rest of their lives. I don't know, my thought and my passion. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, for sure. I absolutely agree. I think that it's, well, first of all, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to do right by our kids, right? I just
Yeah.
think that that's our responsibility. Certainly, as educators and mental health providers, we have that responsibility. But just as communities, we have a responsibility as communities to make sure that that the services and the support that people need is available. And if it's not being utilized, then we have to step back and look at what we're doing that's creating the environment where it's not being utilized. Is it insurance? Is it accessibility? Is it perception? Is it confidence? Right? We have to look at what those barriers are that are keeping any members of our community from utilizing those resources.
Yeah. So I got to say this. I have just absolutely just enjoyed our conversation. I'm going to say this. I was just really excited to have this conversation with you. I'm going to tell you, for those watching, I thought I was going to go fan on Sara because I was just absolutely excited to do this conversation because, mental health is something that just affects so many people. And to be able to have our world here in Florida, and have this conversation with the world over there in Texas, it just is very enlightening for me to know that there's resources that I could get together with Sara and provide to our district, but also other supports that we could provide Sara over there, and let her know, how she needs to fight or what she needs to get with legislation to do that we have here that's really supporting our students. But, I have just truly enjoyed this. I'm going to let her speak for herself, but I know I have immensely enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, I have as well. I hope it's the first of many more. I hope we have an opportunity to bring our worlds together again. I do. When you and I spoke initially, I think we have a lot to learn from each other, and I think we can continue to grow together. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to visit with you and your listeners. And I look forward to the next time that we get to sit down together.
Likewise.
Maybe when it's not, I don't know what it's like over there, but maybe when it's not like 100, I came in and I was like, I was running from another event and I was sweating. It's so hot outside. And so maybe when it's not so hot outside and I can look a little more presentable,
over here
so weather from being out in the heat.
Yeah, over here was like 95 today, and it felt like 104.
Yeah, we got you beat.
So,
I think we were like 103 or 104 today, and I don't even know what the heat index was.
yeah,
we've been on a long stretch. We've been on a long stretch of hundreds, and we're ready for a break. We need spring. So,
yeah.
Well, I thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Likewise, and all the blessings to your district in the beginning of the school year, and just empower the community with their mental health. And I'm here for whatever you need, and definitely this will not be the last of many conversations we will have.
All right, likewise. Wishing you guys the best too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Y'all have a great evening.
All right. Yep.